It is Wednesday, December 28th, 2022. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live to tape steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Vivek Chibber, professor of sociology at New York University, author of The Class Matrix, Social Theory After the Cultural Turn. This was a best of from March 16th, 2022. I can't even remember it. I don't even remember anything that happened more than really 36 hours ago.
Yeah, you have, I don't know what it is about that, but you've infected me with that disease as well.
It happens. You day in, day out, you do the show, everything blends together. Next thing you know, you're 18 years older.
I know. Soon I'm just going to be complaining about different scents. And
sciatica.
Yep.
Right, sciatica.
Yep. You're not going to be able to deal with the smell, and then all of a sudden, like, you're going to have to sit half on your butt with a baseball or softball underneath one of your buttocks because you're getting too old.
Is that what's happening right now?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that started like 5 years ago.
Oh, great.
Yep.
Glad I know that information.
Yep. Well, just giving you a little glimpse into your future. And folks, this is a glimpse into our past. In 2022, one of our best ofs, one of our famous best of shows. You know, years ago, I came up with this idea of at the end of the year, let's run some of our best ofs. And now I see that happening in so many other places. People have picked up on that whole thing.
Wow.
It's amazing. It's amazing. You know, in 2022, I think it was in 2021 when you coined the phrase hump day on Wednesday. And today, of course, is hump day. Just another one of the innovations that you get from the Majority Report. We came up with hump day.
Trailblazing, yes.
And came up with this whole concept of best ofs.
Yeah, if you want to be ahead of the curve, join themajorityreport.com. Support this program.
That's right. That's when
I am
you'll be the first one.
Professional, baby.
There you go. And you'll be one of the first ones when the next idiom that we develop. You know, we've got, like I say, hump day. We did the best ofs. What else did we come up with? I mean, that's a lot.
Newsday Tuesday.
Newsday Tuesday.
No, I actually came up with that one.
That hasn't quite caught on in the same way that hump day and best
dagger
ofs
to
have.
my heart, but sure.
But
Baked into the cake.
baked into the cake. That was also one that I came up with. These are all idioms that
Sam's
we've
baking
developed
background.
here. That's right. Stitch in time.
Yeah, don't look in, like, for instance, the works of Ben Franklin for any of these.
Yeah. A lot of people heard of Ben Franklin for the first time on this program. So, but yes, today we have Vivek Chibber. The book is about, it's a history book about essentially the way that the material and the sort of social aspects, right, developed on the left.
Yeah, a materialist explanation for the cultural turn. Also, as Harvard University Press says, on the Majority Report with Sam Seder, listen to Chibber critique as elitist the current trend in leftist academic thought that views workers as victims to the whims of the state, media, and cultural elite, rather than as rational responders to material circumstance.
You know, folks, this would have been on any other program, like their big show for the week, or I should say their only show for the week, or maybe their big show for the month. For us, it was one of 5 shows that we did that week. But nevertheless, we plucked it out of obscurity and bring it to you. And we also have a bonus comedy. That's the way we're doing it this year. Everybody's going to get a piece of the comedy. Of course, earlier in the week, you heard Hodgman and Rees. Yesterday, you heard this guy, Saul Seder. And today, Andy Kindler. This is was a best of request by a lot of listeners. When Andy was late for therapy, a lot of people think that's a bit. It was not a bit. I heard from Andy's therapist.
Oh, direct
She's
line.
upset that because
They
if anybody needs the therapy, with all due respect.
Andy's therapist has to check in with you like a 50s husband gets checked in on when his wife goes in
is
for
Andy
nerves.
Okay? You kind of want to go to the source of the problems.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Streamline therapy.
But enjoy that. And of course, we've got 3 more days of best ofs. We will be back Tuesday, January 3rd, right? Because the 2nd is the
Observed.
first
New
day
Year's.
of New Year's
Yeah.
observed. That's absurd. And I've never heard of anything like that, but we're willing to take it off. And of course, Emma will be back sometime like in mid-April.
Well, yeah, something like that.
Okay, so
Sabbatical.
great. All right. And so enjoy the show, and we will see you tomorrow with another great best of, as we call it. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. Joining myself and Emma Vigeland, Professor Vivek Chibber, Professor of Sociology at New York University, author of The Class Matrix, Social Theory After the Cultural Turn. Professor, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So, all right, we got this is a sort of an academic read to some extent, but I think it's available to everybody. But I want to walk through, folks. This is, in some ways, a slight history of Marxist theory, and where you feel that it certain turns sort of were not successful in addressing a question, which is essentially why, when we have seemingly a broad awareness that capitalism is not working for many, the vast majority of people in our society and in many other societies, why do we still have capitalism? Right? I mean, that is the central question that you are revising or adding to Marxist theory to address. So let's go back and give us the history of that Marxist theory up until the cultural turn, and tell us what the cultural turn was when we get there.
Yeah, thanks. It's not really just Marxist theory, although addressing the turns within the changes in Marxism is important, because for a century, this was the theory that guided the left. But really, for the entire left, there was an understanding for over 100 years that if you want to figure out how to change capitalism and why capitalism is so hard to change, you've got to look at people's material circumstances, the choices that they have, the constraints that they face, and the way in which they try to do the best that they can for themselves in those constraints, and workers being the main object here. So the idea was, look, if workers aren't rising up the way everyone thought they would, it has to be because the choices that they have make it really hard for them, really difficult for them to organize around their interests, even though they know that they're being screwed over. Now, that was, anarchists believe this, socialists believe this, Marxist socialists believe this, non-Marxist socialists. All the disagreements were about how to go about organizing and what your vision of a humane, just society is. There was no disagreement that workers are basically rational, reasonable people trying to do the best they can under their circumstances. Well, what changed in that was, starting probably around the 80s or so, it really took hold that it's not that a rational, reasonable response to their constraints that's keeping them where they are, but it's that they've internalized a lot of ideology, the culture, the socialization, what they're told by the media, by the church, by politicians. And so they believe what they're told. Now, this had a disastrous effect, in my opinion, in the culture of the left and how we understand capitalism. Because whereas earlier, if you took it for granted that people basically understand their situation, they basically understand that they're being screwed over, they basically understand that they need to do something about it. But the reason they're not doing something about it is because their bosses will fire them, or because it's just too hard to organize because they don't have the time to organize, things like that. Then you work on those things with them. And you try to understand the specifics of each situation so that you can make it less intimidating for them. But once you believe that they actually don't really understand their circumstances, that they don't really know what to do, that they don't really understand that they're being exploited or treated badly, you start thinking that they're fools, that they're dupes, that they're easily manipulated. And it drives a wedge between the left and the people who is trying to organize, because now suddenly, instead of organizers thinking, we have to figure out what their conditions are and how to make it better for them to organize, you start thinking, oh, these guys, they don't really understand what's going on, and it's up to us to enlighten them. And it generates kind of elitism, and that elitism is now rampant on the left towards working people. So the motivation of the book was to try to show what the problems are in this approach and the disastrous effects that it's had.
Okay, and so that idea that that the workers did not understand how they were being exploited and was submerged, that understanding was submerged or maybe repressed, submerged, I think is probably the best word, by all the ideological players that are surrounding them in society, is that concept of false consciousness, right? Is that,
yes.
Okay. And so, and so this turn, the cultural turn, came about in the early 80s, I guess, is what, because there wasn't necessarily a response to the question of why capitalism hasn't fallen fallen up to that point, because it appeared like it was going to. Right?
Right up until the 40s.
Will you just outline that for us? Like, give us a sense of, like, it was very widely believed that we were on track through the first half of the 20th century, that it's sort of a matter of time.
Yeah, I mean, let's step back for a second. You go back to the 19th century, Marx, Engels, creates its own gravediggers, was the term they used. Capitalism creates a working class, it exploits that working class, but that class is positioned to overthrow the system, because it needs to, because it's being treated so badly, and because the whole system runs on its labor. So if that class holds back its labor or even rises up, the system's gone. And it's just a matter of time before that happens. And the socialist movement is built on that conviction. In the 1890s, the early 1900s, that's when you see the socialist movement coming together. And starting, I would say, in 1905 or so, all the way up until the 1940s, what do we see? All across Europe and in much of the developing world, there's revolutions. Regimes are overthrown. If they're not overthrown, they're on the cusp of being overthrown. So it really does look like the system is imploding, like it's driving itself into the ground out of its own sort of internal engines. That's what changes after 45. Now, once in the post-war world, it's becoming clear that the system isn't going to collapse. This question becomes important, which is, why doesn't it collapse? It was looking like it would. During that early 20th century, when all these revolutions were occurring, nobody's asking the question, hey, how come capitalism doesn't implode? Because it was imploding. All the questions were, how can we push it further along? How can we accelerate this whole process of capitalism's collapse? It's when, in the 1950s onward, it stabilizes itself, that the question arises, why does it remain stable when it's true, as Marx said, or the socialists and anarchists said, workers are exploited, they are treated badly, they do have an interest in organizing, why don't they? That's when they start thinking, maybe it's culture. Maybe it's the ideology.
But the stabilizing force, would you attribute that to the labor movement, or I mean, what do you think stabilized it and gave this false sense of security?
Well, I mean, I don't. My point is that I don't think it's culture. I think that during this whole revolutionary era, what was overlooked was that it's in exceptional circumstances that workers are able to get organized. And we've lived through that in your lifetime and mine. What we've seen is organizing unions is actually really hard. And in much of the developing world, it's always been the case. There's no the biggest proportion of unionized workers were always in the West, not in the global South, even after capitalism came there. And in the last 50 years, the proportion of workers in unions has been declining everywhere. So what we see is that the whole episode of an organized working class and a mobilized working class is actually quite exceptional in the history of capitalism. So the question then becomes, what's the norm? What's the baseline situation in capitalism? The baseline is the reason they don't organize, the reason they don't all come together is not because they're duped or not because of ideology. It's because when you get a job, your fundamental concern is holding on to that job because the employer's got the power to hire and fire you. And when you try to organize, you've got to do it in circumstances that it's more likely that you'll lose your job than you'll bring other people together with you. And when you try to bring them together with you, each and every person now has to come together on a platform in which people have different needs and different obligations to each other. You got to agree on what you're going to fight for. You're going to agree whether it's paid vacations that you prioritize or whether it's medical care, whether it's the wage level or whether it's the pace of work. The bringing people together around these interests, escaping the eye of the boss, figuring out what a good strategy is. These are all material, structural constraints that workers have, even if they know that they're being treated like they're being exploited and treated badly. So my argument for what stabilizes the system is the mundane everyday facts about the power dynamics, the power imbalance between employer and employee, worker and boss, and the mundane facts about all the resources and all the costs that they have to take on to organize themselves. Doesn't take ideology to get them to move away from that. It's just the bare structural facts about where they are.
And you label that dynamic, at least in terms of the way that the worker approaches that, as resignation. And I want to come back to that. But there's still one question in that moment where the question is, when things stabilize, or there's awareness of a stabilization in the 1950s, and it's and then the question is like, why is it stabilized is answered at that moment by the cultural turn. But why was the question? Why was the question? Why is it stabilized, as opposed to what were the factors that changed the situation? In other words, if, prior to World War II, there's this sense that like, this is impending. It's a question of time. We can try, things to accelerate it or not, but this is happening. And if you looked around, you had every reason to believe that.
Yeah.
Where was the question of like, what changed? What over the course of these 10 years or whatever it was? I mean, obviously there was a world war, but what about the response to the war that inhibited all of these things? Or was it like, was it Taft-Hartley, or was it, or what, was there some, Bruce Lee kidney punch that like 3 weeks later is when you die? Like what happened during that time, and why is that not examined as a way of bringing out what a response to the stabilization that was being seen, in the 50s addressed?
In the 50s and 60s, I don't think this cultural answer to the question was ruled the roost the way it did by the 80s and 90s. If we trace back this whole turn to culture in the 80s, we can trace it back to the 50s as when this line of thinking begins and starts gathering steam. But actually, in the 50s and 60s, when there was still a trade union movement, there were still communist parties and socialist parties, they were asking the questions, Sam, the way you've just posed them, which is not that, there's some deep, dark secret in capitalism that we missed before. They were thinking in terms of there's something has changed between the 30s and the 50s that's made things a lot harder for us. And they did look at things like the post-war boom, the enormous rise in working class standards of living, the fact that unions have become compromised and they've kind of bought into the system and they're more in the job of managing workers rather than mobilizing workers. The strain of thought was very much there. And you can think of the 50s and 60s as a time when there's these two streams of thought within the left. One is this kind of cultural thinking, and the other is more strategic, more looking at the facts on the ground and what's changed on the ground. What happens is, by the 70s, the social groups, social organizations that are thinking in a strategic way, the way you're saying, they're getting their asses kicked. They are in retreat. The left is collapsing. The trade unionists are in the left wing of the trade union movement is in retreat everywhere. And the thinking about capitalism is taken over by professional academics, by professional intellectuals. And in that class of people, it really doesn't pay to be talking about strategic dilemmas in organizing against capitalism and what's changed for organizers, because they don't do any of the organizing, and their professional interests aren't bound up with the success of labor organizing. First of all, they're very distant from everyday concerns and lives of workers. So it's easy for them to think the problem isn't people's consciousness. The problem is in people's orientation to the world. And also, it just is a lot easier to get along as an academic if you're saying that the world out there is all a matter of perception. It's all a matter of how you see it, rather than a fight between contending interests and contending forces, which is the way the left thought of it. So on the one hand, you get a labor movement and a socialist movement that's being defeated and driven back. And so strategic thinking is declining on the left. And within the intelligentsia, you get this embrace of a very idealistic, moralized, cultural way of looking at the world, because it's the way they see the world. And it does have fewer professional costs. And so that's why by the 80s, this becomes the dominant trend. And it's no surprise that now, today, for the first time in 40, 45 years, in my opinion, you're seeing strategic thinking reemerge on the left. Why? It's because there is actual organizing going on. There's actual fights around policy issues that for the first time is around real issues, and not just culture wars that the media promotes. It came from outside the academy. It didn't come from inside. It came from outside universities. Otherwise, you would have seen this stuff going on forever and ever.
I mean, and I think to some extent, I mean, it feels to me that some of it was, there was also sort of like elements of the academy, if you will, that were sort of like shoved to like into some sort of like third place between workers and what the academy had enjoyed, you know, over the past 40, 50 years, right? Like you had a lot of like, I mean, I'm thinking about the strikes that started in Wisconsin were started by, you know, TAs and, you know, people who were being exploited in the academy in a way that maybe there wasn't that type of exploitation before. And there were sympathies that were sort of developed, I guess, or people perceived.
Yeah, that has given more of a base for a more kind of materialist thinking about politics now. It's limited. You know, the teacher strikes and all that, school teachers, secondary school teachers, elementary school teachers, they face very different conditions than university people, even TAs and RAs. And, you know, the more of a turn to the left came out of the school teacher strikes than from the TAs and what's happening in universities.
Okay, I mean, fair enough. I mean, if I remember correctly, the stuff that was happening in Wisconsin in 2011 in response to Walker was a function of that, and it was because they were. I think it was like it was over largely over healthcare, I think too. But regardless, so once that turn is made, it sort of obscures this notion of resignation as a response as to why workers are not organizing. And that resignation is just like, I'm damned if I do, I'm damned if I don't type of situation. And so I might as well just go with the path of least resistance.
Yeah. So if you were in a university in 1990 or 1995, what you would be told is that the way capitalism works is it's a system in which there's a lot of domination, a lot of people are being bossed around, but dominant classes, elites have hegemony, cultural hegemony. That's the buzzword that was used. And cultural hegemony basically means that because of their ideological indoctrination, because of their socialization, workers give a consent. They agree to their subordinate position in capitalism. Just the way inside the church, the laity agrees to give power to the priesthood, right? They do it because they're socialized into it. So the idea was capitalism runs on consent. And the consent comes from all this ideological stuff that they're told. And because the dominant class controls media, they control all the political institutions, the universities, and all that stuff. Now, this is what I'm challenging in my book, saying that the people aren't fools, they're not idiots. The reason they agreed to stay where they are is because of the stuff that I just brought up earlier about the dilemmas about coming together. So what they do is they don't consent to the system, they resign themselves to it. They kind of shrug and go, well, there's nothing I can do. As you said, there's nothing I can do. If I try to organize, I'll be fired. If I bring people together, we'll probably lose. And if we lose, we're fired again. So until and unless I think there's a real chance of winning, I'm just going to keep my head down. I'm going to try to make the best of this situation. And I'm going to just prioritize keeping my job. I'll do what I can. I might show up to work late. I might try to take more leave than I'm allowed to do. I might even sabotage the work process or, do something to throw, as they say, a wrench in the works while I'm at work. But taking the next step to organizing, that's too much. That means I resign myself.
Does artificially creating, or you could say manufacturing that consent, right? Like, is that really a way to kind of ascribe a morality to a system artificially that does not exist? It gives it a sense of like, that everybody here is playing by the rules and this is just how the chips fall. Is that how you'd maybe characterize it?
Well, that actually is more of a sense of resignation, which is that, look, this is the way the world is and there's nothing much we can do about it. And people do believe that. That's a sign that they don't think they can change anything. And if you poll American workers over the past 40 years, a lot of them would say that. Would just say, if you ask them, hey, do you like your job? They'd say no. You say, well, why don't you do something about it? Well, that's just the way the world is. That's the response you get. What the ideology tries to do is something more than that, which is not just to say, look, this is just the way the world is. You're told this is actually the best of all possible worlds. And if you want to see an ideology that does that, that's what libertarianism is. What libertarianism tells people is, look, you're free. You can get whatever job you want. You don't like your job, quit. You don't like your boss, get another one. You don't like being a worker, become a capitalist. That's the kind of legitimizing ideology that capitalists try to sell. And that's the image of consent. But the truth is most people on the bottom don't buy that. The people who buy that actually is the winners, is the people on top, is the professional classes, the employers. So the moralistic, legitimizing kind of way of looking at capitalism, saying this is actually a good system, that's the image that the intelligentsia had of what workers believe in the 80s and 90s. And obviously it's false. The intelligentsia's understanding of what workers believe is wrong.
So is there, I want to ask if there is a third answer to this. And then maybe this third answer is not actually a third answer, and it is, part of that sort of cultural turn. But if on one hand, the explanation is a certain false consciousness that they've been, that workers have been ideologically indoctrinated to not see their own exploitation in this system, to, and then all the morality that's built around it and this and that. And your argument is that there is a resignation that is a function of the sort of material circumstances that have created, which to me reminds me of black voters not supporting Barack Obama until he wins Iowa, because there was some sense of like, we're never going to get a black president. And so I'm not even going to invest in the idea that we could have a black president because I know that we can't. So I'm not even going to imagine that.
Yeah, it's what happens. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but is it possible that there's also a third answer, which is that and maybe this again, maybe this is not fully, maybe this is actually a category error and it's actually part of that first category. But is it possible that there's a third answer insofar as, I know the argument, that your argument is that what's the matter with Kansas is wrong because it takes this cultural turn. But what if there is not that this cultural ideology or identification is a distraction, but what if it is within humans? Maybe we're not all, the same, that like once I get my 3 squared and my house over my head. And I'm not too concerned about how much of it is. And, I'm resigned to the idea that it's going to be somewhat stressful. But after that, the things that are important to me are actually not material. Like once I have a basic material floor, then I just move on to other things. And it's not a distraction. It's real. It's my real interest. And what is that? Where does that fall in those categories?
Yeah, I think that's actually pretty accurate. I think that is how people think. But the question is, after the 1950s and such, is that the reason that you see labor movements become kind of meek and mild and started losing members, and you see the labor movement turning away from its kind of radicalism that you found in the 20s and 30s? And for a long time, people thought, yes. See, one reason, so what you're describing, Sam, there was a philosopher in the 60s, he was big among the New Left, his name was Herbert Marcuse. And the New Left thought of him as their philosopher in the 60s. SDS was all reading Marcuse and One Dimensional Man. Marcuse said this, look, what's happened is unions, and maybe this is what Emma meant earlier when she talked about are unions, or is labor part of the legitimizing force? Unions won a lot of great contracts for their members. Wages went up, working days were limited. They were able to have, the 1.5 cars and the 2.2 kids and whatever. And the idea was, okay, they've become satisfied. They're complacent. And that's why things have now settled down as much as they have in, say, 1958 and 1964. Now, if all that capitalism, if the only way it harmed employees was by suppressing their wages, then having higher wages, like you're saying, would solve a lot of problems for capitalists and for capitalism. But the employment relation, having a job, harms a worker in many other ways than just suppressing their wages. And people realized this in around 1967, 68, 69, when in the midst of having the highest wages they'd had in the 20th century, workers all over Western Europe and in the United States went on a strike wave like they'd never seen since the 30s. The question is, why did that happen? Their wages were really high. They had the cars, they had the houses. It was because there's another side of the job, which is how fast are you having to work? What are the safety conditions? How much recourse do you have to have your boss listen to you if you say there's something dangerous going on? What they found was that in the 60s, 50s, and 60s, wages went up, but there was a huge speed up at work. Injuries were going up, and the unions weren't paying attention to the grievances. Work days were getting longer. The unions weren't doing anything about it. So even while you're getting the car and the house, you can be harmed in 100 other ways at the job, because what the bosses try to do is not only to suppress your wages, but to get the most work out of you, the most labor out of you, to have the most flexible schedule for them, which means an inflexible schedule for you. All of these things come together in the employment contract. And the secret to capitalism is you've never been able to solve all of them together. You can push in one direction, you can solve some of them, but what employers do is get back through a different channel what they give up through one channel. If the workday is shortened, they increase the pace of work. If the wages go up, they increase the intensity of work. So there's never a time when workers actually experience this image of a settled life, of a decent life, the way that's sold to them. And that's why there's no time when the actual antagonism between employer and employee ever comes to an end.
Did the increase in pay, does that and then the increase in pay and the subsequent or contemporaneous sort of diminishing sort of work standards, I guess, yeah. Does that play into your idea of how you deal with resignation? In other words, okay, all right. Will you talk about that? About how, I guess, like some sense of security that may come with more cash, puts you in a position to feel more empowered in terms of demanding more.
Yeah. So look, if it's the case, simple question. If today we're all part of an effort to try to revitalize the left and revitalize the labor movement. The question is, how do you go about doing it? You need a diagnosis for why strikes and strike activity is flatlined for 30 years in this country. Okay, if your explanation is, well, it's because of culture and ideology, you ask the question, well, why are they duped so easily? And you figure out, you wag your finger at them and you tell them, don't you see what we see? Don't you see that things are bad for you, et cetera, et cetera? Now, if you believe that that's not the reason, and the reason is that it's the crushing weight of the costs of organizing, then you do what you just said, Sam, which is you try to reduce all the risks and all the costs that they have to take. So 2 models of organizing. One is you go into a workplace and you moralize the people, versus you go into the workplace and you pour resources into it as a kind of a risk reduction scheme for them. You tell them, hey, if we go out on strike, there's going to be a strike fund. You tell them, look, if the employer fires you for organizing, we've got a whole team of lawyers that's going to come in and make sure that you're protected, et cetera, et cetera. It's increasing the security of the job action, and so decreasing the risk. And then finally, you've got to show that whatever goals you have, whatever you're fighting for in this fight is achievable. And it's not just a pipe dream that somebody from a union office has come up with. We can actually win this. And you show them that you've got an effective strategy for winning it. This is all treating people like rational thinking people rather than as being dupes. And that's the strategy that the left employed for 100 and some years, until all of this thinking about organizing and capitalism, et cetera, was taken over by people who are not actually in those movements and in those struggles, which is people like me.
If it's the case that you need to go in on a case by case, shop by shop level, and make the argument of, we got your back covered here. This is an attainable goal. That it is a rational decision to make. There's risk involved, but it's not an irrational risk. And is that also an argument from a legislative perspective, let's say, from a more like a 20,000 foot view, for some measure of incrementalism, right? Because if I get the PRO Act passed, let's say, right, or card check, I do sort of non-revolutionary, but minor strengthening of the ability of people on the ground to organize, or, that at one point theoretically, or you tell me if you agree with this premise, that at one point theoretically, the straw is going to be the one straw that ends up being pushing over and creating like a critical mass, if you will, in terms of my perception that this is actually not a bad risk to take.
Absolutely. That is the only way to go. What is the PRO Act going to do? What does legislation do? It changes, you might say, the facts on the ground. It changes the power balance, because now if, for example, car check legislation is passed, now I don't have to stick my neck out as much as I did previously to try to organize, which means my employer's got less power over me. If I have enforceable rights against being fired, which in the US today, they're a joke. You can fire an employee for organizing. It's basically unenforceable, that the employer got punished. Say you can enforce it. Now it's changed the risk calculus for me. So absolutely, the legislative process is part of that whole organizing drive that you're doing. And you have to burn that candle on both ends, as it were. You got to do the organizing and do the legislation. Where we are right now, actually, in the American left is we're aware of the legislative stuff. Everybody's pushing for that. The problem is there's no real power in the economy. There's no real power that the labor movement traditionally gave to parties, so that politicians would feel like they've got to pass something meaningful. And instead, what you get is now like the Biden administration crashing and burning, because it's a big deal that a progressive legislation was even proposed. Something like what we saw in BBB was not even possible 5 or 8 years ago. It's a big deal.
Yep.
Why does it crash and burn? It's not just because of Manchin and Sinema. They just happen to be the front runners on this thing. There's a whole slew of senators, Congress people behind them. because there's no cost to saying no. There's no cost to trashing this legislation for the politicians, because there's no movement on the ground to help them, to force them to do it. There is a cost to passing it, which is all of their funders are going to get, obviously be very unhappy about that. So the legislative side that you brought up is not controversial right now on the American left. What we need to get more serious about is to try to get some power within workplaces, which traditionally was the real leverage, what gave parties the leverage to pass things like the New Deal.
I mean, there is a sort of like a chicken and egg syndrome here, right? I mean, where we have, Taft-Hartley, I think, still sort of resonates and makes it that much harder to develop that type of movement on the ground. I mean, look, we saw the biggest protests that we've seen in decades, probably over the course of 2020. And there's certainly from a federal standpoint, there was no legislation passed. And even, in sort of localized things, it wasn't there. And those theoretically came with even less potential risk than you might have if you do that in your workplace. Insofar as that, like, there was not a one-to-one relationship with protesting during 2020 about police reform to your ability to get fired or something like that from your employer. So where is the intervention that is going to let me put it this way. Is there an intervention that can happen on a grander scale, or is it really just up to, like, you're listening to this program, go into your workplace and organize by addressing, or if you're, working with the union or any type of like a group that's outside of that, go into these workplaces and address all the things that are on the sort of the balance of the scale that say, like, this is a bad idea, right? Start addressing those things. But is there something that sort of can happen more broadly? Do we not have the power, or is it just sort of like tinier pieces of legislation, or is it like bank shots?
Right.
Like, if we had a better system of healthcare, if we had a single payer healthcare system, I'm at work, and if I lose my job, at least I'm going to still have healthcare.
Right. Well, let me start by making a basic distinction here that is relevant to your first question about the massive protests and like Black Lives Matter and all that. There's a big difference between protest and disruption. Protests, it's pretty easy to ignore them if you're in the elites, because what's a protest is a symbolic act. People come out on the streets, they very loudly announce that they're unhappy about something, and they might even rattle some drums and things like that, but then they go home. Nothing has changed. It's basically like delivering a letter, but it's a lot of people delivering a letter. That's different from labor organizing. Labor organizing wasn't ever a protest. Labor organizing, what mattered because it has the potential of disrupting the everyday flow of events in a way that neither protest nor other disruption can. And the reason is, what labor disrupts is the flow of profits. And everything in capitalist society runs on revenues coming out of profits, either in taxes or corporate revenues coming out of it, government revenues, everything comes out of that what is happening in productive establishments. So what labor organizing does is it brings people together, and if they're together in a large labor movement, they are holding a gun to the head of the system day in and day out in a way that no protest can, because they're saying not only are they saying we can come out on the streets in large numbers at any moment. That's great if you can do it, but that's not the key. It's that we can shut down the economy at any moment. That's what gets the attention of politicians. That's what gets the government to listen. Now, that is still in its infancy right now. There's lots of protests going on, but there's not much organizing going on. The second part of your question was, okay, how then do you organize? There's no science to this. Yeah, it's going to come through some combination of legislative activity, what you said about the minor, small organizing efforts in workplaces, and then if it's going to work, it has to come together through some process that we don't understand, we've never been able to understand, or we could do it, we would just do it, right? Some process where these things come together into something big, where there's not just a strike here and there, but a wave of strikes. Not just organizing this or that Starbucks and this or that Amazon, but across the board. And that's what we saw on the 30s. Forget the revolutions, just in the New Deal we saw that. That's what we saw in the 60s, in the second great expansion of welfare states. That's what we have not seen in 40 years. It's got to go beyond protest. Protest is not what changed. Protest is a part of a cultural shift. Ruling classes can ignore cultural shifts. What they're worried about is, at the end of the day, not getting elected, not making profits, not being able to serve their masters, which is the corporate class. That's what gets their attention.
It's basically the withholding of labor is going to, it's like draining the car of fuel on some level.
As long as you're in capitalism, it comes down, as long as we're in capitalism, that's what it's going to come down to.
It's fascinating stuff. Vivek Chibber, professor of sociology at New York University, author of The Class Matrix, Social Theory After the Cultural Turn. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, Emma. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you.
Inside. Oh, this isn't my therapy?
No.
Oh, what an actor.
Now, wait a second. Now, are those headphones? Like
They said they would rather have wired headphones. Is this a prank putting me on the show? You don't even have a show, probably.
but I just can't. I just wonder if you're not wearing those. Is that what you wear with your therapist?
Yes, because I listen to some internal monologues. I do subliminal therapy during her therapy.
So
that's a joke that would rely on you knowing what subliminal meant.
Therapy within the therapy.
Exactly.
Is it therapy within the therapy, or is it just like multiple tracks of therapy going on at one time?
Therapy sensory overload.
How about this old reference? Like if I was a terrible comic. It's an enigma wrapped up with a thing in the other situation. Why are you mad at me already? Why am I doing
Andy, now, let me ask you this. When you do your therapy,
are you Abby Hoffman? When did you turn into Abby Hoffman in the later years?
What do you mean?
Abby Hoffman at a dinner party. Abby Hoffman. You're still the hippie, but you got everything cropped in, and you may be putting a couple of deals together, like Jerry Rubin did.
No. Hoffman and Rubin toured against each other. The yippie versus the yuppie debates.
Well, Rubin took it to the next level. Aggrandizement.
All right. I'm not even sure what that comment's about. Although, he's from Worcester, Abby Hoffman.
What's that?
He went to high school with my parents. I got a chance to meet him. I got a chance to meet him in 87, 88. I can't remember when it was. And I was very excited about that. But be that as it may, let me ask you this. When you do therapy, do you do it in this chair?
Yeah, I do.
You do?
I do it in this chair. I do it with this.
Let me ask you
the set. She gets the same background.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. Has she ever said, Andy? We've talked about this audition that you're upset about not getting for a long time. Let me just ask you a question. What's going on with your backdrop? Has she ever said anything like that?
No, because she's not an insult comedian like you, Sam. I go to a regular therapist. There's a regular therapist. There's no shtick going on.
Are you sure?
She is Jewish, though. She is Jewish.
Okay.
So there's something going on here. I don't know what that means.
Well,
I'm culturally Jewish.
I know. That's my understanding. I'm not blown away by that.
Yeah, I really have. What a new take. I kind of feel Jewish, as part of the group, but I don't like this. Who does like the spiritual part of Judaism? Nobody.
I am so curious, as if your therapist is going to say, like, Andy, your energy seems really different today.
Oh, she will.
She'll notice.
You're so jacked up.
First of all, I'm scared to death I'm going to be like 1 minute late, in which case she's going to say,
you're not
do you care about your, do you care at all about your mind?
Yeah, so wait a second. So let me ask you this. Does your therapist scold you?
No, my therapist is extremely nice. I have a good
Well, you
therapist.
should probably talk to her about the anxiety that you had that you're going to be late. Like I've said over and over again, we're going to let you. You're right there. It's literally going to be just like click, and then you're going to be with your therapist.
That's all I talk about anyway.
You've been nervous about this.
Well,
Andy,
that's all I talk about with her is that I'm late. That's the topic every time.
Did your mother scold you when you were late?
My mother was not there for me emotionally. She was extremely depressed, and she was not really able to, for example, mirror back when your little baby's going, ah, and she's supposed to go, ah, 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 ah. She was like, and then my father was like, yeah, you saw your mother. She went to therapy for 30 years. What did it help? What did it help?
Well,
Wow.
I'm going to do my best to mirror with you.
Sorry,
Okay.
Emma. That was too much too soon.
I'm going to try and do my best to mirror with you.
No, I appreciate your vulnerability, Andy.
Oh, that was like I smoked Camel non-filtered.
So, Andy, this is the moment in our therapy where you feel gratitude because of the effort that Jim Brewer went to give us stuff to talk about.
Oh man,
We have mentioned in the past, Jim Brewer took a little, revived his career. Although I have to say the revival didn't seem too sustained, but maybe it is. I don't know. He did a comedy special last month, and he put it on YouTube. Is that right, guys?
Yes. Yeah.
It was a
watch the
free
full thing.
comedy special. Was it free or?
Yeah. It was. He has a Patreon, but this went out free. This is like an hour.
you should
long free
probably
special.
you should probably tell people that he was considered to be one of the foremost political comedians of his day. On Saturday Night Live, he wrote a lot of the political skits.
No, he did not. He did
Goat
not.
Boy. He did Goat Boy.
He did Goat Boy. He did Goat Boy. And played the super high guy in Half Baked.
Which was
Right.
hilarious.
When
I love
Dave
that.
Chappelle wasn't anti-trans.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Simpler times.
Yeah.
Simpler times.
Here is his comedy special. Somebody had to say it because apparently, in his mind, nobody's saying it. But here is, let's play. I don't know. Let's just play the.
Just
let's-
pop
We're gonna
in.
start with the
Quick in
opening.
order.
We're gonna
Yeah.
start with what he opens with.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, thank you all for coming out and risking your lives. Because there's still people going, you're not really going out in public indoors, are you?
Sorry, YouTube ad.
Okay. So there's an ad. We'll play through that. But we should say he's, mocking the idea that people would be nervous about COVID. And
But with a funny face, Sam. Emma, he doesn't say that. With a very funny face.
I know.
Couldn't help but love the guy. It doesn't matter how many millions of people die because they didn't get the virus. That's not important. What's important is that he's a goofy guy, and we're going to have a good time tonight.
well, I mean, it just amazes me that you have over a million deaths in this country. You still have, what are we at now? Like 380 to 400? Are we over 400 a day now? In deaths from COVID. And, I get that people are tired of wearing a mask and but it's real. The idea that you're mocking people, I still, particularly with this latest wave, we're 438 daily deaths a day. That is 6 times more than the flu, incidentally.
You don't have to sell me, Sam. I haven't left a house.
It's just
since
so
March
weird to me.
11th, 2020.
All right, let's continue on. He's mocking the fact that people might be.
I mean, that's the face, though, right? This is his only face. Yeah.
Yep.
Go deep into the chin.
Different than the Jimmy Dore.
The Delta, the Omega, the Charlie Brown.
stay inside. This is never ending.
The classic
gross.
scientists use funny names for things.
He hits
Charlie
an
Brown.
Stay in the
excellent point
basement.
so far.
How long am I supposed to stay there?
Oh my God.
Incidentally, there has not been a lockdown in this country for 2 years.
Yeah.
No.
Well,
For
the
2
only thing.
years.
Can I just say one thing? Because I have always despised Lorne Michaels, and I do it every day, and I have an altar and everything. You know, everybody goes, "Oh, Lorne Michaels, he's the comedy whisperer." He doesn't know a goddamn thing. I'm sorry for the language. He doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. He wouldn't know comedy if it fell in his soup. He goes out and gets Jim Brewer. He puts Jim Brewer on. For what reason? We don't need. Saturday Night Live is not the home of. Well, I know sometimes.
All right, continue.
I'm sorry. I'm okay now.
Okay.
Safe. Yeah.
Just to pause it real quick, there's not a country on Earth that has more than 1 million deaths from COVID total, besides the United States.
That's what he's celebrating. Why don't you guys get that? He's having a good. He's going, yes, number one.
The vaccinators, you were real cocky a couple months ago. I got vaccinated. Got my second shot April 19th. I can't get sick from the corona. I'm vaccinated. See this
Seems
bucket
like
of
my
virus?
bit.
I'm vaccinated. I'll even lick metal. I'm not afraid of anything.
This is so true.
Never came from FOMO. Never did come from licking metal. So
I don't have
that's
to wear a
inaccurate.
mask.
People vaccinated are getting sick.
What? You need a new booster. What?
There's that face again.
Who wants a shot? Who wants to see a ball game?
Oh, it's a cockatoo.
That's a walrus.
No, he's not
walrus,
really
sorry.
saying
Wave your
anything.
flipper.
Right?
No, he's not saying anything except for he's saying like it turned out like this the virus is still dangerous.
Right.
Yeah.
So what is his? You know, it's unbelievable to me. Like the other day, I was it's got the subvariants getting big here in Los Angeles, and I had to go into a store. It's like, I'll put my mask on. Oh, and then when the subvariant isn't around, I'll take my mask off in certain situations. I can't even believe. I can't even believe we live in this. This can't be happening. That we live in this country like this.
I mean what's also interesting is like where's all the horrors from the vaccine?
Yeah.
Like all the cost associated with people getting vaccinated. What happened to all that? Like, wasn't wouldn't there have been now, according to all these people, just a huge amount of like horror stories about vaccine? What
thalidomide.
happened? Yeah, exactly. And none of it.
They've
All
abandoned that.
gone.
It's mostly
Can you-
just now the vaccine doesn't work. How arrogant were you? You said that it would be a silver bullet and COVID would go away as soon as everyone
Yeah.
got vaccinated, and no one said that.
And we have to say, like, the vaccine does work in the sense that you get less sick if you have it.
Yes, it reduces symptoms and spread.
Can we?
You
play a
have
clip?
to. You have to get vaccinated. Don't be on the fence about it, everybody.
Can we play a clip?
It's
from-
science and stuff.
Can we play a clip from the comedians out there who are doing that huge riff on all the idiots who said that the vaccine was going to hurt? Like, can we play a clip from that comedian?
Ooh.
No. All right, let's go. Let's keep going.
Oh, I've been. I guess I'm safe now because I've been vaccinated.
Do we-
Now
Do
I've
we
been
want more?
boosted.
Do we want more COVID bit or more about him talking about like people getting offended?
Yeah, I think we move to the offense part.
yeah, let's move-
He's
yeah.
already milked all his COVID material.
We're still mixed.
If anything, life taught me the last 2 years is we don't know anything what's around the corner. You make all the plans you want, you get a bit of CO, your jobs are shut down. We have no clue how quick life just goes bloop, which made me crazy how many people they would put on the screen and media are getting offended. Everyone was offended. I'm offended by this, and I'm offended by that. And I'm
Pause it
gonna
one
talk
second.
about
Pause it. Don't keep us up on screen. I'm just Andy. You're a professional comedian. How does you not knowing what life is going to bring next segue into people are getting offended on TV? How does that, like, what?
I think I would think that seriously. I've seen Jim Brewer perform way back in the great clubs on Long Island in the late '80s that Sam and I used to headline at.
No,
and
I know.
he does not seriously. And I mean this. It wouldn't matter that it's like he's not. You know, there's so many people in this world who are now willfully stupid. So it's like I don't think he's a stupid person, but he is willfully stupid about these things, and so he's basically doing the same act that he's been doing forever, and he's probably just angry about ticket sales and stuff.
Well,
like that.
another word for angry is offended.
Ooh, that's... All right, continue. And blip. I think he got pissed. I sort of feel like he also sort of abandoned like the slow segue when he realized like him going like your world changes just like blip. And nobody laughed at his funny noise. And so he said, fuck it. Let's just go to the offended part. Let's go.
You make all the plans you want, you get a bit of CO, your jobs are shut down. We have no clue how quick life just goes bloop, which made me crazy how many people they would put on the screen and media are getting offended. Everyone's offended. I'm offended by this, and I'm offended by that, and I want to talk about this, and I want to talk about that. And if you're that person, listen, man. Life is offensive, okay? My wife's been battling cancer for 12 years from food that she gets poisoned with that they feed us. That's offensive. We can't see the elderly because we may kill them, even though they got 6 days to live. We'll see you one day, Grandma. Stay behind the glass.
I feel much better with no human contact. Thank you, Dr. Fauci and CDC.
And fear. Thank you. I bet you she'd rather have that touch and hug and be dead tomorrow than do this in a restaurant.
Jesus.
What? What is that? You want one touch or hug? The tough one. I didn't get that one.
You
I
don't get
even
the
do
pick and
math.
choose.
No. The joke was she would rather have some touch or hug and then die the next day.
And then die of COVID, unable to breathe.
Classic joke premise structure.
But you know what? though?
It's literally just like it's literally just like he's using all the sort of pretense of comedy just to deliver the same lines that like Rush Limbaugh would have delivered.
Yeah.
Or
what the
Greg
thing is?
Abbott.
I feel bad because I know, like, I gave a speech in that Montreal thing. It's a whole story. But so I was looking around to talk, to talk about him. And I know that his wife, I feel bad. I feel terrible. His wife is sick. She has been sick for 12 years. But it doesn't. But the bigger point, yes, I feel bad about that. But then he goes back to giving people information that could kill them.
Yeah.
Absolutely, people will die. People will die from his show because his family members or whoever, they don't believe you can get a variant. They're not vaxxed. They're not. So it's really more horrible that he is bringing his own family into it on that level, But I don't think he's asking for sympathy, but it just makes me angry.
Yeah, I mean, that's a problem for the CDC and the FDA, right? And instead, we're fear-mongering against all those people as if they're trying to control us with fake vaccines.
In my mind, I just say, like, it's quite possible that Brewer could be on a show right now like this with a panel mocking a comedian who is saying, like, cancer's not real. Come on. Cancer's not real. Like, go get some, all you need to do is just drink wine. And if you drank wine, you would be getting all you needed, the enzymes to fight cancer. Like, and he could be sitting there mocking them. I mean,
I'm listening to this podcast it's called Twin Flames, about these people got fooled into thinking they could find their soulmate on, through online dating or whatever. I don't know what. Well, I spaced out again. Go ahead.
That's not true.
Oh no, you can, but I don't know where my point was again.
Okay.
I'm talking about this more with my therapist, and my mind does go blank. But I won't belabor it. If I think of it, I'll say it.
Let's. Do we have another clip?
Yeah, we got some more of this offensive stuff.
Okay.
Last week, 2 Marines, hand to God, came to see me with their no knees, blown off, over in Afghanistan. Came in wheelchairs, followed me around. We laughed.
Just in case you didn't know what a bomb
offensive. But there's people literally walking around. Here's the thing with being offended. Listen, if you're easily offended, do yourself a favor. It's not healthy. It's not healthy for you. It means your asshole's tight.
I mean, this is the worst material I've ever seen. This is like 1975 material. What's the matter with you people? Loosen up out there. You should take a laxative before you come see me. You're so tight in your ass area out there. I hate this kind of comedy. I hate Long Island. I hate that I grew up there. I hate Billy Joel. I hate everything. I hate every club I ever. No, actually, Billy Joel's okay. But not really. But it's just all these guys it's guys like Billy Joel and Jim Brewer walk around going, yeah, from Long Island, I got the book of boo.
Yeah. Well, he talks about another thing, like those who often say they're offended probably don't like what we're doing with deploying troops around the world to get their legs, you know, off. But then he says, well, and I'm offended by that. Well, okay, I'm kind of offended by that too. But then he says, if you're offended, your butthole's tight. So is Jim Brewer's butthole tight when he sees
and also,
guys with legs blown off by war?
Right.
He's doing an old bit with a new bit. He's trying to figure out how to get that bit that he's always done into this bit.
That's what it is. That's why we have a pro on, ladies and gentlemen.
I can give you the.
We're sitting here going like, this feels like it's shoehorned, and that's because it's shoehorned.
He's evergreen, Jim Brewer. He's evergreen, so he can plug in. This is the same act he did in the 70s, or the 80s, or whenever the hell he was around.
Let's go ahead.
But funny, but he's got funny ideas.
Listen. If you're easily offended, do yourself a favor. It's not healthy. It's not healthy for you. It means your asshole's tight. It does. And if science is your god, science will tell you that's not good for your physical being. It means you're always stressed up and your ass can't work right and you just can't wait to go, I can't wait to talk about this subject with my facts and figures that I learned. And we see you trying to escape, trying to let gas out. You can't even let gas out. That is so unhealthy for you.
See? Fart humor. He wants to talk about fart humor.
We can hear it. It sounds like when you blow up a balloon. And you know when you let out a little tiny bit of air at a time?
Yeah.
That's what your ass
that's
sounds
exactly
like.
what's going on here. He's pigeonholing his old fart routine.
It's unbelievable. I bet you could get a film, you could get a camera, you could get a crew, and you could actually see word for word these sentences.
He also went back to the cockatoo, and he's mixing the cockatoo and the asshole and the farting and the Fauci. I mean, there's just not a lot of thematic consistency.
And I just want to say, it's elitist to say other people shouldn't share opinions, and that the problem with this day and age is too many people are sharing opinions. That's an elitist, misanthropic thing to say.
Yeah.
I love the idea, though. And he's like, God damn it, this fart stuff is just gold. But how can I get it into my anti-COVID, caring about COVID shit? Oh, I know. Of course. They're all uptight, and that's why they're offended. And then I can go into the fart stuff. Beautiful. Continue.
Here's the thing. This is the way he does comedy. It's like that. He just does comedy where he's desperate to get laughs. That's how he built that act, and it's not unusual. Many comics start out, they're desperate to get laughs. They don't like any silent. If you watch old Robin Williams, anytime there was silence, you go, oh. So this is the kind of act that you. So he's so scared. If he hears any quiet at all, he's got to go right back to the farts, right back into the whole thing. Yes.
Yeah.
It's sad. If it was 1 year in, it would be sad. Now it's just a crime against humanity.
Right. I mean, the irony about all of this is that you do get the sense that actually the tightest anus in the entire place is his. He's so worried that the material's not going to carry it. So that's why he's always making those faces. Continue.
It sounds like when you blow up a balloon, and you know when you let out a little tiny bit of air at a time? That's what your ass sounds like.
I am so offended.
I can tell you the
finger doing.
What this is based on is everyone loves. We all do this, folks. We all have body functions. We got to talk about it. Like everybody, like you don't know that you fart. And I understand the whole topic. I understand it. I get it. There's nothing funny
He's a
about
truth
it.
teller.
The best comedians make you look at something in a whole new way that you never thought about before.
And to be honest, like Saul would love this.
Right, but
Not
that's
the offended part though. He'd probably get caught up in like, wait, why is he doesn't believe in COVID? How come we know people who have died about COVID? But the fart stuff is funny. All right, continue.
Stupid.
Another ad. Okay. Oh my God.
He really put a lot of ads in there.
Hey, freedom doesn't come free.
There's
Is
such
that
a
special? That's a special? That was.
Oh yeah,
Brewer
it's
doesn't have
a
any
special
kids,
on
does he?
YouTube.
Brewer doesn't have any kids, does he?
That I don't know. I have not done a study on him.
I get the sense he doesn't because he doesn't seem afraid that anybody's going to see this in the future.
I used to do his show. Back in the 90s. You know, like he had a call-in show, and he was not political at all. He just go, Andy, how you doing?
Right, a radio show. He had a radio show. This is actually, I think, like in the aughts, not the 90s.
Yeah, and it wasn't terrible to me because he has some condition, obviously, with the sounds.
All right, go ahead. It's just like Fauci.
I mean, there's people out there going, you know, Bob, I'm losing work. I've been watching this new thing on the news, and I never really thought about it, but I've been losing my sleep and taking things out on the family. What's going on? You know that toy? Yeah. Which kind? The potato head?
Oh, knew it.
Ah, right.
Why is it called Mr. Potato?
I don't know. Wouldn't you have thought about that in the 40s or the 30s?
Can you imagine just waking up in the middle of the night? I can't take this anymore! Why is it called a Mr. Potato Head?
Yeah, so many people doing this.
Yes. Many people are saying.
Where's my picket sign? I want the world to listen to me.
I don't get the potato head.
He's working the pole.
It's a posit.
Oh, pause it. Okay.
First he licked the pole, and now he's using it as a lance or a
I
picket
don't
sign.
know if there was any. I never heard of any outcry about Mr. Potato Head. It's just that the business that the Mattel or whoever puts out Mr. Potato Head
There was a thing. There was an actual
Yes.
thing.
said
Okay.
we should just call it Potato Head because literally the whole thing about it is that you can change its gender and its profession and all of it.
Yeah.
Like that's literally the game that we built.
Yeah, because if you accept that it is just Mr. Potato Head, when you put like the lips on and the big eyelashes, what that you're saying like Mr. Potato Head must be cross-dressing, as opposed to saying this could just be Mrs. Potato Head now.
And then he just mentions the controversy. It could have been Dr. Seuss. It could have been anything. that the right wing has been upset about it, because it's really they're being upset as opposed to like
it's an imaginary like woke person who's
insomniac
protesting about Mr. Potato Head. The only
sleep at night.
I mean, yeah,
they've been doing this since the 70s, right? They did it with the NPR, and I mean, but like in the old days, you used to be. I hated them. I hated when Giuliani did went to the museum, but at least there was a thing with a piss thing that he got. It's disgusting. This is so. Who in the world could get agitated about this except maybe Fox News 70-year-old people?
And then he gets to integrate his entire fart thing. Like, oh man, I could actually stretch this out. This used to be my like 7-minute chunk. It's now like my 23-minute chunk. All I got to do is like, I got to say, Dr. Seuss. And then all I got to do is like say, Mr. Potato.
So why is his pinky in and around his asshole? Do we have an understanding?
No. That's just it's chapter 17 of the comedy book. He's indicating physically when he shows that, then you can almost visualize the fart coming out.
Oh wow!
The pinky is the distortion.
So Christopher in Hawaii says Brewer does have kids. I remember seeing him live in Peekskill in New York in 2017 while he was still pretending to be a pothead and riding that half-baked fame. He had a bit about how his kids were addicted to their phones.
Oh,
that's a good thing
creative.
To clock, because the pothead thing, I mean, that was why I rented that for sleepovers when I was in 4th grade. Like, the pothead thing character was very funny to, like, children.
Yeah.
Right.
He's not smoking pot anymore. That does disappoint me.
Was he ever a big pot smoker? I think I heard that it was a big phony.
Oh, I know. I never saw the movie Half Baked. Is that with Chappelle?
That's where it comes from. Yeah.
Well, he certainly didn't get any insights from smoking pot. He didn't get any creative ideas.
No,
he's not relating to it that way.
He doesn't strike me as a pot smoker. I'll say that. He strikes me as somebody interested in other kind of substances.
I don't know. He's. I think let's not make the mistake of reading too much into who he is.
Yeah, I think he's a guy who's making a decent amount of cash by mentioning a right-wing grievance and then making a high-pitched fart noise after it. And, not a bad way to make a living. It's just too bad that it actually has to be videotaped and people see it.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of tumult in the right wing. They go, I don't know, can we get someone, does a shorter fart bit and then goes into some? I mean, I don't see how effective this is even on the right, really.
Yeah, I mean, on that note, like how many? It's been out for about a month. How many views would you expect that to have? Just guessing.
I mean,
300,000.
I would expect more. It's not at 1 million yet. So
right, I would expect. To me, it's always like, 40 fart jokes, 40 million people, and there's a Facebook groups forming over it.
Yeah, but I mean, so he put it up on YouTube. What? Because there was no streaming service that was gonna pick this gem up.
Yeah, I mean, just to comparison, Stavros Halkias' live stand-up released also a month ago, 2.9 million views.
Oh. Yeah.
He didn't do he does a new no fart material, I'm assuming.
He doesn't make fart noises, I don't think.
Giorno Giovanna, that so-called comedian in his echo chamber with his coke sweats, doesn't get that more people would rather no one get sick and suffer from it. My cousin fell for the anti-covax rhetoric despite working at a club and caught his fatal case of COVID, which orphaned his son. We lost my grandmother due to diabetes, but they both in life were of the thought that no one needing to get sick or die, and it's okay if people remained isolated. People like Bobby here look more like the edgelord kid who thinks he's funny when he's an ass. Both died during the pandemic. Folks are really complaining about the Brewer stuff, but fortunately, Andy, I have made a commitment to you. And I want to give you a little bit of downtime before therapy, like 2 minutes, so that your therapist is not blown over.
Did we give you something to talk about with her?
Yeah, well, I was already. It's like they said they'd get me off at 10, but it's 10:56 now. And so, what if I have to get something to eat before? I mean, I have to have some.
Oh,
yeah,
go.
so I was already.
Andy,
Oh,
we love you. Thank you so much for coming on. We will see you in the future, and we'll get an update on your therapy.
I love you guys so much, and I'll tell my therapist. She'll be very happy you let me out. I don't know.
Yes. All right. We'll see.
Have a great weekend.
Andy Kindler,
Bye-bye.
ladies and
I
gentlemen.
love you.
AndyKindler.com.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made, for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes you? Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. The months drifted into years while I shifted in and out